Hello, BookTube. Well, I have a cool, hip West Coast am reading video for you, just to catch you up on what I'll be reading, some of the things I'll be reading this weekend. Uh, I have, once again, a full slate of work to do this weekend, and that it's so much work that it will actually eat into my reading time just a bit, because it's all deadline stuff, and so I can't ignore it. And it's a good problem to have. I'm not complaining, but it does limit the number of books. Once again, the number of books I'll be showing you, the total number of things that I read this weekend might be higher than this. But this is the bare minimum. I want to do these, and I'm not counting on doing any more. And the first one is something we've seen on this channel before. It's This Long Pursuit by Richard Holmes. Just a bunch of his occasional essays. He's a great biographer, and these are just shorter pieces that he's done for Checky Poos, for various commissioning editors. And then there's Amelia Gray, Last Night with the Duke. This is a Regency romance. It's a novel in her series, The Rakes of St. James, and she's really good. so I greatly look forward to it. So I don't know when I'll read it. It might be last, just for the enjoyment factor of it. And then there's this, Katie Fallon. This is a natural history of the vulture. The world's most unloved bird. They're actually fascinating. They're grotesque, but they're fascinating. This is one of those rare instances where the popular mythological or sociological characterization of an animal as loathsome and disgusting is actually true. Vultures are loathsome and disgusting. It's not just that they eat poop and bones, and it's not just that they have bald heads. It's also their personalities. I've had occasion to be around them in the wild, and they're not nice. They're not nice people. I've had occasion to be around many, many different kinds of wild animals out in their own habitat, and I can honestly say that some species are nicer than others. Now that's horribly speciesist, but nevertheless it's true. Like, for instance, it's a Steve digression, but then again, you knew that when you married me, right? Like, for instance, porcupines are the sweetest people. Now, maybe that makes sense, because if you were covered in barbs, free from predation, basically, you'd be free to be nice too. Maybe that's the case. I don't know for sure. I tend to doubt it. There are plenty of vulnerable animals that are also very nice. But for instance, I mean, if you're out and about, I don't know how many of you spend a lot of time outside. There are some booktubers, I have my doubts, and I don't anymore either. I'm not one to talk, but once upon a time I did spend a great deal of time outside, and I got to know these people, and porcupines are nice, whereas beavers are not. They're not nice people. He will, if you meet one in the wild going about his business, he will almost certainly be an a-hole. I don't know why that is. I don't know what explains that. But vultures definitely fall in the latter category. They are a-holes. Now, I'm not saying, I mean, they're exterminated wherever they live. They're actually endangered in a lot of places where they were once as common as sparrows. And I'm not saying that they deserve that. The world needs its a-holes. But I'm looking forward to this book because it's been probably 35 years since I read a popular natural history on vultures, and there's bound to have been all sorts of new understandings of how their society works, how their interactions work, and I'm a sucker for a good natural history, and this is going to be entertaining, I think. And then, what was that I was saying about a-holes? This is something I actually started it a bit earlier, and I'm going to read the whole thing. It's a new big biography of Richard Nixon by John Farrell, who is a great biographer. He's fantastic. The bit that I read of this book, I once intended to read the whole thing, and I didn't do it. And the bit that I read, gave me troubles. It gave me troubles, and I stopped. And I think the more I think about it, the more I think that maybe some of those troubles came from me. Uh, Most of you, I would imagine, are too young to remember when Nixon was president. Uh, it was a wound. It was a very personal thing. You don't get over it, and you don't ever get calm about it. It the 21st century may have its own versions, and if it does, you will all learn what I'm talking about. But it definitely colors your reading of anything about Richard Nixon, and I worry about that, because that would be, if that was true, that would be my fault. That would be me being a bad reader, and I don't like that. I try to police against it, so I am going to to try this again. All of the elements are in favor of me trying it again. First of all, Nixon is long gone. His administration lives in the history books now. Most people in America don't remember it. And second, the biographer is a known quantity. He's great. Now, if I can have those two things in favor of a subject and still suspect that I'm being unfair to it, time to go at it again, even stronger, and make sure that I'm not. So this weekend, no matter what, I am going to read the whole of this thing, and then we'll see. I will assess. And then there's this King Canute and the Viking Conquest of England by W.B. Bartlett, a subject that I just recently read a biography of Ethelred the Unready, who's an English king who lost England to the Vikings. And whenever I think of this, I mean, King Canute and his father play a big role in that history, and the book was really good. I'll try to remember to link my review down below. But the subject fascinates me anyway. I think you've probably noticed on this channel, if you've watched any of my 500 videos, that I have a sweet spot for the Vikings. They utterly fascinate me. And I also love studying the way history looks at them, the way historians tend to think of them. I remember reading a quick summary, an overview of European history years and years ago, decades ago, in which the writer made offhand reference to the fact that the brief Viking era, the 2 centuries of the Viking era, when it put its real mark on Europe, the author said that it was marked by freebooting and the occasional farming of coastal villages. And I read that and thought, oh, well, that's great. Didn't they also conquer England? There was no mention of it, and I felt like a bratty kid in the back of class. So I'm very happy that this is that people are stopping. They're not airbrushing this anymore. Historians are actually turning direct attention to the fact that England, it wasn't a couple of cities, it wasn't a couple of cathedrals. England was conquered by the Vikings, and there was a Viking king. When you think of the roster of English monarchs, you don't think of King Forkbeard, but he was one. So, wishing doesn't make it so. He's still there. He won by conquest. He conquered England and became its king. And I love that story. And this is going to be, I think this is like 300 pages long. And then later on next year, I think Yale is coming out with an enormous biography of Canute. Just himself. It doesn't have the Viking conquest of England. It's his whole life. So, this will be good groundwork for that. And then the last thing I want to show you today, the one other thing that I'm sure I'm going to make my way through this weekend, there could be other things, you never know, is this. This is a new boxed set of the Watchman. And as you can see there, it's 12 individual volumes, 12 individual hardcovers in a slipcase. The Watchman was a miniseries, a comic book miniseries that came out decades and decades ago by Alan Moore, who's insane, and Dave Gibbons, his great artist. And it came out issue by issue. I followed it issue by issue. I got the first issue and thought, what is this? These characters are sort of takeoffs on other comic book characters but this is all very dark and weird. And by the end of the third issue, I was saying this is dark, this is weird, this is, obviously an obsession that Moore is working out on his own, but it's also brilliant. There's no denying that, no avoiding it. No matter what you think of Alan Moore, and I'm not his biggest fan, it's absolutely brilliant meditation on what would happen if superheroes really existed in the world, and if the world went to hell around them, what would happen? And it came out in 12 issues, and it automatically, right away, started gaining a huge following, and then it was made into a graphic novel collection, and then another graphic novel collection with a different cover, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one. It's been reprinted many, many times. And I have a lot of those up on the graphic novel shelf. I have probably 2 of those paperbacks. I always have a couple, because every once in a while I will encounter someone who likes graphic novels, likes comic book literature, and has never read The Watchman. And when you encounter somebody like that, the thing you want to be ready to do is simply hand them a copy of the book. You don't want to say, oh, no, you really need to get to it. You want to just hand it to them. Then your work is done. Then they have the book, and if they don't read it, it's their own fault. But the one thing that's never been done in that whole history of reprinting is this, where you do a deluxe commemorative reprint that not only reprints the whole story, but recaptures the experience that those of us had in reading it in its chapters. When you read it like this, the first volume that you pull out has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has an arc of its own. In this case, the death of the comedian. And I am so accustomed in the last 30 years to reading Watchmen as a book that I almost never, in my comic book long boxes back in the closet, I have all 12 original issues. I never go back and look at them. I would never dig them out. If I want to read The Watchmen, I just pull the book off the shelf. But that loses something. There's an element of enjoying The Watchmen that isn't present when you do that. This captures that. And it's a box set, which means it will live really easily on a shelf. It can be a shelf of its own. So I'm greatly looking forward to it. I just did this, and some of you might remember, the DC Comics did this also with the other great graphic novel that they are responsible for, Batman Dark Knight Returns. They just recently did a box set with all 4 of the individual issues so that you could read it the way it originally came out, with its original dramatic arcs intact. And I reread that, and I confess, I got it, and I had it on the Cracker Barrel for a while there, and I thought, well, I've read Dark Knight Returns a million times, so this will be fun to read it again. But no, it was a different experience. It was a better experience, reading it volume by volume. And it was eye-opening. And I think this is going to be the same thing. I think I'm just going to love it. So this and the Regency romance I will probably save to the end, because if I've got those at the end, if I say I'm going to read those on Sunday night, if I get my work done, then I'll be more likely I'll be more likely to go at my work with a hammer and pitons, because I do have a lot of work to do this weekend. But anyway, that's my am reading for today. And as usual in the comments, I would love to know what you're reading, and also what you think of any of these things. And I'll see you soon, BookTube. Thank you.